got 1 day left. We've had a good floor time still. Generally working Senate bills. We had a few House bills today, but in the swing of things, reading them from second to third reading calendar today. So lots of good, a little discussion. So questions?
What's the status on the Medicaid bill?
Senator Christensen was off the floor. We want to have the fiscal note before we move the bill, and I don't know if that's been released yet. I know they were working on it. So when we get the fiscal note, we'll probably proceed with the bill, but we're waiting for the fiscal note.
President, what did you think about the governor's remarks on Medicaid expansion last night in his speech? He did not endorse specifically the leadership bill. He made some very general remarks. Do you see him as on board with what you're doing, or?
We have kept the governor informed. He probably needs to speak for himself where he's at, but I'd be personally surprised in concept if he wasn't supportive of what we're doing.
But you're moving this very quickly. This is fast tracked. I've been told that the plan is to get it over to the House this week. House wants to have a veto-proof majority approval by the end of next week. Is that intended to put pressure on the governor to go ahead and sign this, or?
I don't think there'll be any pressure. I think we're doing the right thing. I believe, the process we're going through, again, is we need to put something in statute so we can get the waivers. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish. And again, my impression is that we'll probably, we've had good discussions with the governor. I would be surprised if he wasn't supporting it. I don't see the intention to be talking about.
A lot of people, though, are coming out against the effort to make changes to Prop 3, especially at least in initial implementation. Today, 40 faith leaders have signed a letter urging that there not be any limitation on what voters approved and to follow the will of the voters. How much influence does that have on what you're doing? Again, you're moving very quickly.
Yeah, we'd like to have discussions, and we haven't had this dialogue with those 40 faith leaders. We welcome them here and be happy to talk to them.
What happened between, the governor's office did an assessment about the cost of Medicaid with the tax in December of 2017, which showed that the tax increase would pay for it. But then there was another assessment that came out in January of 2019 that showed this $64 million deficit. So what changed in that period?
And I'd probably like to have Senator Christensen here, and maybe we can get those answers for you, but I don't know that specifically, so be happy to get those answers in.
And I think that's part of putting the fiscal note on this bill, so we actually make sure that it's clear to everybody and going through that process. So I'm trying to get this right and make sure that we're doing it in a way that's fiscally responsible. And I know that I hear from people who are on both sides of this issue, ones that want to make sure that we are serving those who have the greatest need, but also want to make sure that we're doing it in a fiscally responsible way.
And the three things that give it fiscally sustainability, and again, if we want to cover more people for a longer period of time, if you find additional revenue or control the costs, it gives it that stability. So the three things that give it stability are removing the COLAs, the hospital assessment, and having the federal government pay 100% of the 40,000 lives between 100% and 138 of poverty. If we expand, the federal government only pays 90-10, which costs the state more, which compromises the sustainability and the number of lives we can cover. So those are the three things we're trying to accomplish with stability.
But again, the federal government does not pay 100% of the care for those folks. They require those people to contribute. So I understand that the state's not involved in that, but it's
the
not.
State saves 10%,
Yeah.
which is a big number, which gives stability.
But voters said they wanted those people covered at by the state, right?
But I think what didn't happen is voters didn't approve a tax increase that was great enough to be able to
That's the
provide that
problem.
support. And that's what the problem is. We have to be able to live within the framework and the way that's sustainable for the state.
What happens if those waivers don't come through by April 1st? Do you wait to implement it until the waivers do come through? Or,
I think that's why we need to have it in place, so we can have those decisions made before the session ends.
but if the waivers don't come through, there's no answer, what then happens?
Our hope is we have that decision quickly. And then the waiver that we're looking for is to go to 90/10. And that waiver probably won't happen until later in the year. But the funding we're looking at with the hospital assessment and the additional state appropriation, we hope is enough to take us through the year so that we're back, and if there is a problem, we can deal with the next session.
But again, if you don't have the waiver that you need for the limited program that would start April 1st, the question is, do you honor the will of voters that those people get at least some coverage by April 1st? And how do you do it if that waiver's not there?
So I'm sure we'll have another media availability. We'll be back here talking about it either later in the session or in a special session.
So, I mean, I guess, are you looking at contingencies though? If for some reason, red tape, government shutdown, whatever happens, that you don't get those waivers, what's plan B?
Yeah, where the plan B will be, if we don't get it, and come back and figure out another way. I mean, I don't know that we have an exact answer, but I believe there's a commitment to implement it, try to implement it April 1.
Could we hear from the minority party?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. We voted against this yesterday, not because the Democrats aren't interested in participating in a compromise of some sort, because to Senator Milner's point, we have a fiscal responsibility to tend to the budget. On the other hand, we also have a responsibility to live up to the will of the voters, and so as long as the spirit of Medicaid expansion is followed through on by this body, and we come to some reasonable compromise on how we can get there and cover those individuals that were a part of the Proposition 3 package, I think that you will see us in lockstep with each other. This also illustrates, I believe, the importance of having the fiscal note attached to SB 96. And so until we can get that and really dive into the numbers, you'll see a Democratic minority standing against this at the moment.
But you're open to some kind of compromise then?
I think that what we realize is that we have to see the exact numbers. We are concerned about balance, and we need to make sure that as we roll out Medicaid, that this is sustainable not only this year, but in perpetuity. And so we have to have a plan in place. And so that's why we were here on both sides, looking at ways that we can make that happen.
But again, are you open to some kind of compromise? If you can strike a deal, and would the minority caucus switch its vote?
If we can get, again, it's all about keeping the spirit of Proposition 3 alive. If we can make sure that all those individuals that were outlined in the proposition covered, and we can come to some reasonable compromise on the way that we fund that, then yes, individually I'll be there with the majority. But we do need to have those numbers at hand first.
But a compromise bill over in the House is not going to be heard. That's very similar to what Senator Escamilla tried to substitute on the floor. So alternatives to this bill are not being heard, whether it's the extreme of repealing Prop 3 altogether, or whether it's the modification bill that's a little less limiting than what SB 96 does. So how are you going to come up with a compromise if those bills aren't even getting a hearing?
That's a great question. Over here we stood against SB 96 not because we don't agree with the idea of finding common ground, but because we didn't see the numbers attached, and we didn't have, I wasn't a part of the subcommittee that had early voice on this, so I can't speak to that specifically. But I did support Escamilla's substitute.
And I think we all are trying to cover between 0 and 138 in some way, shape, or form, and do it in a fiscally responsible way. And we're working on it. having good conversations.
Are there any specific things that would be, you could see being part of a compromise, whether that was dealing with the 0 to 138%, going to the ACA insurance plans, or work requirements, or any of those other specific pieces of SB 96?
Well, I think our president spoke to the hospital assessment that's allowed under the Affordable Care Act, and so we need to be talking about ways that we can raise revenue in that capacity. The voters, through Proposition 3, did indicate that they're willing to pay for Medicaid expansion up to 150,000 new tons. So that, again, that's the spirit we're talking about, and we need to be having these hard conversations. We're also having a dialogue around tax reform this year, so this needs to be a part of the discussion.
May we talk about some other numbers here, and excuse me if this is a question that you've already addressed, but if you look at best case scenario with waivers versus Prop 3, what would be the difference in the number of people covered?
We're covering the same, am I understanding the question right? We're covering, we're covering the same amount of people. Same people from 0 to 138%.
Okay,
The same number.
so the 150,000 that Senator Kitchen just mentioned, you think 150,000 would be covered with the waivers or with Prop 3?
Absolutely. The difference is 40,000 would get a commercial policy, so you'd have 110 have a Medicaid policy, 40,000 would get a commercial platinum policy. The policy is paid 100% by the federal government, rather than the state having to pay 10% of it, which saves us a ton of money, which allows us to cover more people and run the program longer. Same 150 lives covered, just a different way of doing it.
Have any other states tried anything similar? Has a similar waiver ever been approved in another state?
We've never shied away from being innovative,
Is that a no?
but we have had, and Representative Dunnigan has had conversations with CMS, he needs to speak to that, and the White House, and in high levels in the White House, and they've looked favorable on what we're doing, or we wouldn't be spending so much time and effort if we didn't think there was a strong possibility and probability.
But you can't show us anything in writing that guarantees that strong probability is there when experience shows that it's not
But
there.
we're willing
What's
to,
changed?
we're willing to appropriate money because we have to, because we're only 70-30 to begin with. And you've got a very conservative legislature willing to spend a lot of money on Medicaid, expand April 1, and we wouldn't do it if we didn't feel that way.
Stay tuned.
And I think that's the reason we're passing this, we're working to pass this early, so we have time. We're not waiting until the end of the session, and then we're in mid-March and trying to put this in place by April 1st. So we're trying to be responsible at every step of the way in this process.
Other questions? I think we're good discussion on this. Are there questions about anything else?
How's tax reform coming?
Tax reform, I think it's too early to tell. There's a group looking at it. I haven't heard a lot of, I don't think we've had any discussion in our caucuses. But I'm not sure that we have a lot of details. on it.
Is there a Harper bill that would lower the tax rate, the sales tax rate?
I'm not aware.
You're not aware.
It's
None of the
tied to
bills
remote
have-
sales tax.
None of the bills have surfaced yet that are tied to the leadership package. Okay.
How many bills are we at right now? Bill requests versus bill
Or
numbers?
Senator Buxton, when he had Mark, Andre, you know how many bills? I've heard 1,100,
They're over 1,100.
over 1,100.
There was a,
I've memorized them all, I want you to know that.
Me too.
there was a bill in the Virginia legislature yesterday related to abortion, and third trimester abortions. It's created quite a buzz across the country. There are a couple of bills here which would restrict abortion in terms of Down syndrome and also after 15 weeks gestational age. I'm wondering if you might speak to the dichotomy of how some legislators across the country are addressing this issue and how Utah is addressing it.
You know, I haven't memorized the 1,100 in Virginia, so I'm not sure, but I'm aware of the bills. I think most of those are starting in the House. I think that'll be an issue that we'll probably deal with this session, next session, and for sessions to come. So how we deal with that, we haven't had a caucus discussion on it. We don't know all the specifics of it, and I probably can't really answer that directly.
How about the minority in terms of the bills that are on the table currently in Utah and the differences as you may see them between that and what's happening elsewhere?
Well, the minority will always protect a woman's right to choose. We will always stand up for constitutionality, and we are concerned about litigation against the state of Utah. So from a fiscal standpoint, we're concerned on all three fronts.
You like those bills in Virginia and New York?
No.
You don't? Well, why not?
Well, I actually haven't read the text of the one in New York, so I can't speak to those. I haven't redlined the ones here in Utah, but at face value, I have some concerns, and I'd be happy to talk to you about them offline.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
What's up in caucus today?
The upside, the
Lunch.
upside will be lunch,
Lunch.
What's your downside today?
no lunch.
Mark, do you know what's on caucus agenda, Andrea?
Yes, tax.
Taxes.
Okay, we're talking tax on caucus agenda. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.